Morning, friends. Chapter 21. Enrique Redeemed, Jalisco Nayarit. One day in the fall of 1993, a tall, slender, light-skinned man in new cowboy boots and a cowboy hat low over his eyes boarded a bus in Nogales, Sonora, and headed south to his home in Nayarit. Enrique wore a new pair of dark blue Levi's 501s. His hat cost $500, his boots $1,000, at a western wear shop in Phoenix, Arizona. He had another $15,000 in cash in his right pants pocket. His bus wound out of Nogales and down Mexico's Highway 15 that runs parallel to the Pacific coast. He sat wary of his surroundings, even when the driver put on a movie starring the comedian Cantinflas. He didn't watch it. He kept a hand on his right pants pocket and didn't dare sleep. The bus trip amounted to his redemption. Months before, as Enrique toiled in the sugarcane fields with his father and despaired of ever finding a way out of his poverty, he suddenly received and accepted an offer to work in Phoenix. A cell boss needed a driver for his heroin store. On his last day of work as a sugarcane farmer, he arrived at the sugar mill black from the soot and dust of the field, as if he'd stepped out of a coal mine. He took his bags of sugarcane and threw them as hard as he could into the pile. "The next job I have is going to be for the love of the work, not for need," he promised the foreman. The next day he kissed his mother and took a bus to Arizona. This was his chance. The San Fernando Valley, with his uncles working, would always limit him. He went to Phoenix eager to show his abilities. In a week he knew the streets, and before long was running the store himself, cutting up the heroin, answering the beeper, and driving to deliver the balloons to the clients. His customers were mostly professional women, lawyers, nurses, a prostitute or two. He soon raised the store's daily take from $1,200 to $3,000. He worked from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m., grabbed a hamburger at a drive-thru, and was at home by 10 p.m. to balloon up the heroin for the next day. He didn't have time to clean his apartment or his clothes, and he made $5,000 that month. One day his suppliers in Phoenix told him the boss would be arriving that night from Jalisco. This man impressed Enrique. He had a permit and could cross the border legally whenever he wanted. He was there to meet with his workers. As Enrique headed home that night, his beeper buzzed. He found a payphone. The big boss wanted McDonald's, a fish sandwich, before the meeting. Enrique scurried to get the food and returned to the apartment. He walked in as two gunmen had his boss and his supplies in their underwear and on their knees in the bathroom. The invaders had found 2 ounces of heroin, jewelry, and some cash. Yet when they demanded more and placed a gun to his head, Enrique kept silent. That morning he had packed tens of thousands of dollars in stacks of cash and had no time to do anything with it. He put it at the bottom of a trash bag overflowing with the detritus of his fast food diet, old French fries, pizza crusts, used paper plates, and soda cans. If he told the gunmen about the money, it would look like he'd set it all up. So he took their pistol whipping in silence, and they left with only $5,000 in those ounces of heroin, while at the bottom of that garbage bag was another $80,000 they didn't get. The boss, a grateful witness to this kid's loyalty, pulled him off the street and gave him 2 heroin drivers to supervise. Enrique worked harder. Business boomed. He sent money to his family and began building a house for himself. When telephone services finally came to the Toad, he paid to make sure his family had a line installed in their house. 3 months after the robbery, Enrique was ready to return home. He bought his boots and hat and boarded that bus with the $15,000 in his pocket and his eyes wide open. Below the bus he had stowed duffel bags bulging with clothes, jewelry, shoes, and VCRs. For so long he had sought this magnificent return. He thought of his uncles in California who had sent him home with so little after working for so long. He hadn't the spine to make the business what it could be. They hadn't the spine to make the business what it could be, or the vision to see what he was capable of. His new boss had vision. Enrique felt elated to have broken from the small world of his rancho. The clothes he brought home were Levi 501s, Guess, Tommy Hilfiger, and Polo, measures of his success. His dad would have to remain silent. At 15, Enrique had been helping his family survive. Now, at 18, the heroin he sold in Phoenix allowed him to take over the job full-time. His family gathered him up at the bus station in Tepic. They drove him down the highway through Jalisco into their rancho. There, across the road from his childhood home, stood his new house, under construction and paid for with the money he had sent. It had 2 bedrooms, a full kitchen, a garage with an automatic door, a roof through which the rain never came, and a bathroom that was indoors. He felt at that moment that everything was possible, and he wanted to cry. Later, in his room with his mother, he pulled the cash out of his pocket and more from his sock. It fluttered onto the bed. "Did you rob someone?" "No," he said, smiling broadly. "It's mine." He noticed she didn't ask how he got it. He was sure she imagined. That night he would always remember was the first time his family had more than enough to eat. He brought out shirts, dresses, toys. His youngest sister called him Dad. The Arizona heroin business and his loyalty during the robbery won him new friends, and soon invitations to parties in Jalisco thrown from the top heroin cell bosses. They had new cars and big houses. He felt ashamed of his petty dreams of a year before. In this world, men dreamed big. For the next 2 years he split his time between his village and Phoenix, running his boss's heroin crews on the streets. He bought a used black Mercury Cougar. He took his girlfriend and his family to El Diamante, Tepec's best restaurants. He put his sister through college. She was the first in her family to graduate from college. He went into bars and restaurants and didn't think whether he could afford it. Freedom was what he felt mostly. His mother no longer asked her husband for money to feed the family, nor endured his blows and insults in exchange. His father no longer had to depend on the mill to pay him. Over the years, merchants in town had learned many ways to put down the farmers who drew a living from the sugarcane and coffee, and who constantly asked for credit. Now, for the first time, the baker smiled when Enrique's mother entered his shop and spoke warmly to her. He waved at Enrique's father when he passed. That year at the Feria del Elote, Enrique and a friend who worked with him in Arizona owned the Central Plaza in Jalisco. The Saturday of the fair, they paid a banda $3,000 to play all night. They drank and offered alcohol to anyone who showed up. They only stopped because Mass at the cathedral was about to begin on Sunday morning. Jalisco had never seen that before from a couple of guys from a rancho. Usually rancheros could save all year to pay for only 1 hour of banda music in the plaza. But heroin did that. It made everyone equal. It did not, however, endear Enrique to his girlfriend's father, who was happy to sell his meat to his mother but didn't want an uneducated kid from the Toad, a chiva dealer, for a son-in-law. When Enrique was a boy, the butcher had been friendly. But since Enrique took up with his daughter, the man never spoke to him, and Enrique learned to keep his distance. In time, returning occasionally to Phoenix, and then a stint in Portland, then back home again, Enrique began to feel unsettled. His salary wasn't bad, but his expenses had risen now that he was spending so much time among all those new friends. He was limited. He could see what was on the other side of that river that he felt divided the Toad from the world, but he couldn't make it across as a worker. His ambitions were greater now. He had a car, but wanted a new one. He had a new house with tile floors. He had piles of clothes and money, but that wasn't enough to retire on. He'd taken orders all his life and wanted to know how it felt to be the boss. He was 22. Time to get married. His girlfriend's parents would never allow it. She was still in high school. So one day in 1996, he took 10,000 pesos, $1,000 in his Beretta 9mm, and filled the Cougar with gas. He went to his girlfriend's school and drove her off to Puerto Vallarta, stealing her from her parents. It was the village way of marrying against the parents' wishes. When she realized what was happening, she put up a fight at first, with lots of conditions, all of which he agreed to. He took her to the Hotel Crystal, which he remembered later for the first valet service he'd ever used. When they returned, in the eyes of the rancho, they were as good as married, no matter what her parents said. He took her to his new house to live. Then he set off to Albuquerque, New Mexico, where he had heard black tar heroin would find a market, and he a future. This kid is crazy. Have a good day, friends.